My name is T.E. McHale. I'm the manager of motorsports communications for American Honda. And again, welcome to all of you this morning, and thanks for being with us. It's American Honda and Honda Performance Development's pleasure to partner with the Derek Daly Academy in presenting this seminar for you this morning. And it is my honor to introduce our guest instructor. Quick background on Derek. He spent 5 years racing in the F1 series. He still is active in F1 as a steward. And I have it from his own mouth that he has to be one of the very few people, I would guess, on the planet who's actually looking forward to going to Azerbaijan this year. He raced Indy cars for 7 years, sports cars for 5, and has spent 25 years as a broadcaster since his retirement. He wrote the book Race to Win, which carries, as you'll see on the back of the cards you were handed coming in here today, a pretty strong endorsement from no less than Mario Andretti as the Bible for young drivers. Our seminar today is particularly timely in the fact that Derek has a special interest in a very young driver of his own, his son Connor, who we are pleased to announce will be running Honda Power for Dale Coyne Racing in the IndyCar Series next year.
Yay!
That was just announced yesterday, so again, this is particularly timely for us, and we got a lot to cover, so I'm going to get out of the way, and it is my pleasure to introduce you to Derek Daly.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, T.E. I'm glad everybody got up at 8 a.m. to be here. It's always a question about when you should do these things. Last year we did it on Friday, and people said, well, if we want to bring our kids out, we don't really want to pull them out of school, so we tried this early Saturday morning. But I can see a great cross-section of young kids who have a dream about what they might do in racing. I see former drivers, team managers here, and people attached to the sport. And so what I try and do is I happily say to everybody, I made probably all the mistakes you could possibly make in my career. Little did I know at that time the education it would be that I could lean on in the years to come. And as T mentioned, Connor now is established as an IndyCar driver. And as he came up through all the junior ranks in America, there was a lot of decisions to be made, and he was pretty successful in winning in every class that he went into. And I was asked by moms and dads, how would my son do that? Or how would my daughter do that? And because we ran a racing school in Las Vegas for 10 years, there was a program that we ran for Barry Green of Team Green called the Team Green Academy. We ran 144 young American drivers through a program for 3 days over a 2.5-year period. And we had a mountain of information about these drivers, and I began to realize they are so different, so unique. They look different, they talk different, they walk different, they dress different, and they drive differently. And I began to understand this unique package that each individual driver is. And I had access to everybody in the paddock, and I began to ask them, why do they, as team managers and team owners who've been around for decades, think some drivers are successful and some drivers maybe never reach their potential? And with all of that information, I wrote a book called Race to Win. Some of you have probably seen it. But it was interesting because as soon as I wrote it, I got such a mountain of feedback again from parents and young drivers to say, we never knew that. And so what SCCA Pro and Honda and HPD now have a passion for is trying to go even deeper into the grassroots of American racing and perhaps give you some information also that maybe you haven't seen before. The title is What If It's You? Anybody know what if it's you means? I'll very quickly tell you. In 5 years' time in 2020, what if Michael Andretti or Roger Penske or Rick Hendricks or any big team owner that you know, what if he makes a phone call to a young driver and says, I want you to drive for my team? What if it's you that gets the phone call? What will you have to do in the next 5 years? What skills will you have to develop and learn and demonstrate for a big-time team owner to make that call to you? Well, I'm going to go through what I believe are the skills that you will need to develop to become what I would call the complete champion. And we have copies of the book here for people as they leave. But in this year's book, I've done in the second edition, I did a couple of things different than the first one, and I'll tell you in a minute why. But one of the things I want every parent in particular to understand, and every driver, you are all completely unique. You are a bit like a golfer. A golfer has a certain swing and a certain style, and they try to get him to be successful using the style he naturally is born with. And I'm not sure a lot of people understand that you can't force a driver to do something in a car that you saw somebody else do. You can teach him the dynamics of what you're trying to do and let him fit that in with his particular style. Brembo Brakes in Italy did a really interesting study with Formula One drivers that came out, and I just captured the essence of it from some of the most famous names that we know of. In brakes in particular, they measured Ayrton Senna. They said they cannot remember a driver who used such a high hydraulic ratio as Ayrton Senna, because he loves small master cylinders that give him a lot of hydraulic pressure. That's what his style and his feel needed. They then also had Michael Schumacher. They said he loved a short and responsive brake pedal. Although not a giant, he was able to exert significant force on the brake pedal. He loved the big master cylinders and the pedal that didn't move. That's what felt right for him. Alain Prost, 4 times world champion. His accuracy and clean style meant he never even stressed the brake pedal. It wasn't a big issue for him. Vettel, he could pick up the subtlest differences in friction material. Only driver competing in F1 right now who prefers one particular set of brakes over another due to the type of carbon in the brake pad. Hamilton, entirely unique feeling with his car. Extremely reactive when he starts to brake and often exceeds brake limits. All of these drivers became world champion. My point is, there isn't a certain box you have to fit into. There will be a unique style you have, and you'll end up tailoring your package to get the best from your particular style. Now, I mentioned we all look a bit different. We all feel a bit different. We're all in an era where there's different personalities in the sport. Some people think you should always wear a white shirt and a black pair of pants and maybe a tie and be well groomed. Have you ever seen this fella? He's a 3 times world champion because he's got a unique style of his own. People say he's a lightning rod of human drama stories for F1 today, which he is. But would you ever doubt that when he steps into a racing car, he's able to do exactly what Mercedes needs him to do? But he'll do it in a very unique fashion. So the information that you hear today, remember that your driver, you can absorb the information, but you will filter how you use it within the package and the uniqueness of your particular driver. Okay, let's move on here, and I'm going to try to stay right on time here. One of the things I changed in the first edition of my book, when we had the Champions Pyramid, this was the first one that came out, we actually inverted the Champions Pyramid in the second edition. Now, the reason I did this is because I wanted to give everybody an understanding of how the teeter-totter of your career can operate, and how critical the decision-making is, and how it can fall over for a decision that might be wrong. And in our sport, it is so expensive, it is so dangerous, and it's so complex that the ability now to have to make accurate decisions on a more regular basis is now front and center more than any time in our lifetime. In Europe, in Formula One, they now have Formula One drivers at 17 and 18 years of age. So the decisions they make are critical also. but we get younger and younger because we get more and more information on a more regular basis. So just understand that the reason we turn this upside down is because this teeter-totter of your career is always moving either away from success or towards success. It seldom ever sits still. The first piece, I want to go through each of these skill sets first, because this is the very foundation of skills you need to develop if you ever want to get that call. Or let me put it another way. If you want to become the very best you can be, and if you become the very best you can be, what more can you ask? Or what more can a parent or a sponsor ask as a return on their investment in an athlete? So the first one at the bottom is TID, talent identification. I am glad that there are team managers in the room here and some former drivers who are team managers, because this might be an area that I think is seldom understood. Every young driver here, every driver is born with a particular style of talent. There are two distinctly different styles of talent. One is instant reflex talent. The other one, which is very different, is feel-sensitive talent. They're completely different. One is not right, one is not wrong. But to give you an idea what it looks like, instant reflex and feel-sensitive, an instant reflex driver is the guy that has his nerve endings on fire. He's absolutely flat out every time he's in the car. Teams love drivers like that because they know the car is going absolutely as fast as it can possibly go, because this guy is on the limit all the time. Now, the disadvantage to an instant reflex guy is he doesn't pay that much attention to what's going on with the car while he's doing it. Half the time he's trying to save his life every time he gets to a corner. But teams love the guy, but he needs a certain type of support. Now, the feel-sensitive guy, here's a good idea. You've heard the phrase, feel through the seat of your pants. This is the guy who you can rely on to give you accurate feedback. This is the guy you can rely on to sort out a bad car or to develop a new car. Now, the frustration with this guy is you got to tell him to shut up sometimes. Just drive the thing. We're not going to get it any better for you. Get in, strap yourself in, and just go do it. So let me give you an idea who I think would be instant reflex drivers. So an instant reflex guy, here's a list. Hamilton, absolutely, we know. Nerve endings on fire. Montoya, without a doubt. Kimi Räikkönen, Tony Kanaan. All people I've put in my book. Keke Rosberg, Nico Rosberg's dad, I was his teammate in the year he won the World Championship, so I know exactly what his style was. Vassar, Trulli, Jean Alesi, who won for Ferrari, all instant reflex guys. Now, here's a list of feel-sensitive guys. Nico Rosberg. When he signed for Williams, Frank Williams says he is more like an engineer than any engineer we currently employ. He's got that much information about the car. Jenson Button, Gilles de Ferran, famous at Team Penske for the information he could bring back and how he could sort the car out. Dario Franchitti, Damon Hill. He was the test driver at Williams before he moved into the role of race car driver and became world champion. David Coulthard, Bourdais and Zanardi. Now, instant reflex, feel sensitive. Here's where it gets really interesting, because the instant reflex guys need a different type of support. When they're teenagers, the discipline has to be instilled in that driver. You have to bring back information. Learn how to do it. Develop a discipline. Have an engineer, have a support system around him that teaches him to a point where it becomes his natural discipline. Over here, you know the guy is feel sensitive, but you got to turn him loose every now and then, because sometimes you run out of time and you can't make the car go any faster. This group here doesn't need as much engineering support. What about if you could develop both? Here's a list of guys that clearly developed both. Schumacher, Vettel, Alonso, Andretti, Prost, Jimmy Johnson, Dixon, Jeff Gordon. Because when you have the ability to understand which type of talent you were born with, and you can support the weak side, so as you develop both, you develop the ability to have sustained greatness, which is what the guys in the middle do. Very few team managers understand that. The real magic to the successful teams at the highest levels is when they have one of each. Because the field-sensitive guy sorts the car, has the best setups, the instant reflex guy absolutely drives the wheels off it, and one pushes each other. And guess which team happens to have one of each today? Mercedes, of course. I'm not sure they know how they got there, but for teams who have the ability to make the decisions on the style of driver that they can bring in, the real magic is when you have a complementing team, one pushes the other. But identifying the talent your driver is born with is one of the absolute keys to how you support him in his early teenage years, and it becomes the very foundation of everything he does from then on. Okay, let's move on. I want to go on to the technical side, which is the second level of the pyramid. Now, the technical side is, if I was to ask a question, how can I make this car go faster? I just had Juan Montoya up there on the instant reflex list. There are quotes in my book that I got from Frank Williams that said the reason we let Montoya go is because we absolutely needed to have more information so as we could develop the car. It had nothing to do with the speed of Montoya. I believe he's arguably the fastest racing driver I've ever seen. Brilliant. But that one piece of inadequacy led Frank Williams to actually let him go. Now, his argument was, Frank, give me a better car and I'll go beat Schumacher. But without a doubt, Michael Schumacher went to the start of every race with a faster car than Montoya. Why? Because of the technical skills he learned, so as he could develop and make his car faster and go to the grid with a faster racing car. This is a learned trait. And with learned traits, it starts with the discipline of identifying what talent you're born with first and then drive in this technical understanding. But if you can go to the starting line with a racing car that's tuned to be faster than anybody else in the grid, can you imagine how much easier your job becomes? And think about all the wins that Michael Schumacher had. He got himself in a position to win because he was technically one of the most astute drivers. There are stories in my book about him at 10 o'clock at night calling his engineers, asking them what springs somebody else used at a test. He was that invested in the development of the car to take advantage of it himself. I cannot tell you the advantage it is for a driver to have a technical understanding and a learning about how to make cars faster. Something you have to develop if you're going to get that call. Okay, let me move on to the communication side. And there's a whole back end to this, but I want to explain the Champions Pyramid first. Communication skills. How can I communicate more speed? How can I communicate my way to speed? You've all heard about this chemistry between a driver and an engineer. You know, what is it? It's a belief system that they build. It starts with the driver asking questions. How can I get better? How can I give you more information? How can I be more productive? How can I communicate at a higher level to you, Mr. Engineer? How can I explain what's going on in my car so as you actually almost feel like you're driving the car? Because I need your engineering input, but it's up to me to communicate. Part of the way Michael Schumacher communicated with the Ferrari team, he was a gift giver. He loved to buy gifts for his mechanics, and they loved it. Ayrton Senna had a completely different way to do it. Every time he walked into the McLaren garage in the morning, he shook hands with every one of his mechanics. And before he left at night, he made sure he shook hands with everybody again. And they absolutely loved it. And communication within a team, a powerful way to build it could be as simple as saying, thank you. Thank you for what you did for me today. Because a thank you is a powerful motivator to the people around you that you rely on to bolt on the pieces that you need to go out in competition against everybody you're against. Okay, let me move on to the next level in the Champions Pyramid, the next skill set. And this is where the separator begins to come in. Because mental skills and understanding them, and whether you apply pressure or absorb pressure, can determine whether you're able to unleash all of your skills or not. But how do you become bomb-proof in a racing car? How do you become mistake-free? How do you become relentless in a racing car? Because if you have a certain skill level that you can perform, and you mentally are afraid to let yourself go and let it rip, you'll always drive with fear instead of driving fearlessly. And there are so many samples, not just in motor racing, but in all sorts of sports, of how the mental skill is the separator. And this, again, is a learned trait. And there are kart racers that I see when they're 12 and 13 and 14 years of age, and you can see some of them make critical mistakes when they lose focus. And if they don't identify or even admit that they need to work on a mental skill development, they inevitably will carry that all the way into their car transition. And all it does is it becomes an inbuilt restrictor when you get into cars, and it's at a much more expensive level. So think about other athletes. Let me just show you an example here. There's a fellow called Jordan Spieth, who I'm sure you've heard as a golfer. He's 21 years of age. He made $21 million last year. He is renowned on the PGA Tour for having great mind control. When he was in difficulty at a golf tournament one day, he went to his coach and he said, look, he said, tell me what's wrong. He said, I can do anything with my mind. He said, I'm not afraid to make changes, whatever is necessary. But I can do anything with my mind. Because it's up front and center. Because without his mind being completely free, it doesn't matter what swing he has, because it becomes an inbuilt restrictor for him. Let me show you one more example. I took this from the year 2000. There's a magazine in Autosport in England that's very much the Bible for everybody in the industry. And when Jenson Button made the jump to Formula One, he was a phenom, a young kid that they said had great potential. Alain Prost called Frank Williams and said, you need to test him because he's got something unusual. There was a quote in Autosport that year. It says, Jenson Button has the quality and the talent to do the job in F1. The problem now is that the road is still very long until he's in a position to win the championship. F1 is very difficult for a young person. The money, the business, the people, everything. You cannot say he's going to be a future world champion. That depends on his head. Now, these are journalists who follow these drivers around the world to every race. They understand how they tick. They have dinner with them. They watch every practice session. They talk to their engineers. And they know, depending on how his head is, will depend on whether he becomes world champion. He was teammates to Lewis Hamilton, you remember, at McLaren, and got the better of Lewis. People say because of his head. He's one of the most reliable drivers today because he doesn't allow his head or emotion, doesn't allow circumstances to dictate his behavior. This is huge. The mental side is huge. And from my experience with racing drivers, most of them are absolutely afraid and scared anyone would ever recognize they need mental skills support. And if you don't recognize it, I promise you, you have an inbuilt restrictor. The sooner you have a safe team of people around you to identify this, to help you develop and get over it and take a weakness and turn it into a strength, add it then to your natural strengths, you have the potential to become a powerhouse. And all racing drivers are born with strengths and weaknesses. They are never all born with all strengths. There are always weaknesses there that have to be developed if you're going to become what we call the complete champion. Okay, let's move on to the physical side. And I won't spend long on this because I think we all know when we start in the junior series, it's fairly easy to drive the racing cars. The races are not that long. I remember when my son Connor got into an Indy Lights car for the first time. I said, "What's it like?" His one-word answer was, "Brutal." Brutal. So suddenly the physical exertion went up because this car was heavier, a lot of kickback in the steering, a lot of bumps on street circuits. He said brutal. So brutal physical effort suddenly became an hour-long race also. So the physical effort went up. The key to the physical effort is Michael Schumacher, when he went into F1, made a vow, "I will be the fittest Formula One driver that ever stepped into an F1 car." He said, "I want to be able to go flat out on the last lap just like I can on the very first lap." He changed the physical conditioning of racing drivers because when they saw what he did, they said, "We better do the same." He started off as a Mercedes sports car driver. He would have his blood drawn during tests and analyzed to measure the amount of oxygen in his blood cells so as he could monitor his diet to be physically in the best possible shape he could possibly be in. And he did it, and he forced everybody else to do the same thing. Okay, let me move on to the next level. The next level is, well, it's hard to know whether it's a skill or whether it's a feeling or whether it's something you're born with. But desire and commitment. I once asked Mario Andretti, what's the differentiator between those who make it and those who don't quite get there? He only gave me a one-word answer. He said, desire. It's the desire to push through everything that's in your way. And at the time, I thought it was a bit of a strange answer, but the more I looked into it, desire and the desire to do it and the desire to push and the desire to set a target and the desire to get there really can override almost any other preparation you put into this. Because think if you went through all the other skill sets we just went through, but you didn't match it with desire, where would you end up? Probably in a shortfall. And unlike stick and ball sports, if you're a gifted football player, you can go out with a complete football team, you can make lots of mistakes, and one gifted play can win your team the game. Do you know in the NFL on any given Sunday, 50% of all the teams win? And you see in our sport, it's a lot more exact. In our sport, there's only one winning team. And in our sport, sometimes you only get one opportunity. And unfortunately, in our sport, you can't hide any mistakes. And unfortunately, in our sport, it stresses you physically, mentally, and emotionally. And you can't hide anything, which is also the great thing about our sport. But the beauty of our sport is there is nothing hidden from any of us. My book is full of analogies of the great success stories all over the world about their particular model of what they do. Anybody here, hands up, ever build a model of anything? Just about every one of us. Isn't it amazing how you know how to build a model after you build the model? So with this as the background, let me show you what I think, how you could build your particular model to be a success story in the future. Would I like to be successful, or do I want to be successful? Like and want is a Grand Canyon separator. Because if you truly want something, it doesn't matter what gets in your way or who gets in your way or what shortfall you have, you'll get there. And believe it or not, true desire to develop these skill sets and to drive yourself forward if you do have world-class talent, it's amazing how our industry wants to align itself with those talented drivers. There are go-kart manufacturers and go-kart teams and car manufacturers and major manufacturers who identify and see talent and says, you know what? We should help that driver. But the more of this package that you develop, the more chance you have of garnering that support, which is the more chance you have of getting that phone call from the big-time team owner. Let me just give you an example of something else that another driver said, friend of mine, and this is about commitment to win. Derek Warwick was a friend of mine, is a friend of mine. We went through the European Formula 3, Formula 2 championships together, and we were in F1 together. He drove for the Renault F1 team. He made this comment about Lewis Hamilton. He said, Lewis has been sensational all season with 11 wins. He fought all season to beat his teammate Nico Rosberg, but it was his pure will to win and total commitment and his ability to put pressure on at the right time to pull off that overtake when it really mattered that made his season stand out. That was last season. That wasn't even this season. But do you see the pure will to win and total commitment? Now, if you demonstrate a pure will to win and total commitment, do you think your mechanics sense that? Of course they do. Do you think if you ever struggle and your sponsors detect that and you have a shortfall, do you think they'll do anything possible to make sure you get yourself where you need to be? Because this is all driven by the driver at this stage and what he wants to do and how he wants to do it and how far he's going to get. Let me show you one more. Kobe Bryant, as you know, is retiring. The next morning after his announcement, I was watching CBS News and Jeff Glore came on and he contrasted Michael Jordan and Kobe Bryant. He said in their prime, both players stood out for their scary, intense desire to win. Now, isn't it amazing the great players in the NBA were also separated by their scary, intense desire to win? You can't fake that either. I don't think you can coach it either. You can provide opportunities. You can provide what the consequences might be, but I don't think you can coach into someone's heart the desire they might need to ultimately be successful. There's a young kid here, lives in Indianapolis, called Drew Storn. Jack, you might know his name, Drew Storn. Son of Mark Patrick, who is a television sports director here that I worked with for many years. His son is currently in the place of the Washington Nationals. His high school coach said this comment about him. Drew is meticulous. He wants to understand everything he does and why he's doing it. He studies himself and knows when his timing is off. Now, this is a player developing himself on the way to the big leagues. He makes millions of dollars today. And do you think it's a coincidence that he's meticulous and he studies every aspect of what he does? Hamilton. Recently at the US Grand Prix, it rained all day Friday. Will Buxton ran around and got interviews of everybody he could possibly get. One of them by Hamilton I thought was really interesting. I think it showed a bit of a ruthless side, which champions have to have also. But he said, I take it. I don't wait for anything to be given to me. I go out and take it. Now, can't you see that deeply rooted in his desire to beat Nico Rosberg and his desire to become world champion, his desire to fulfill a dream, that you actually take control of what you do yourself? Okay, I mentioned the model earlier. Let me unfold the path or the model, because most parents get a bit glassy-eyed when they first get into the sport because it is so complex and there are so many different answers to the same question. So what we tried to do at DDA is try and create a model or a path that you can see clearly and a timeline. And we gave you a copy of it as you came in here, because this is what we call the X factor. And the X factor is how you may develop in stages your career. In other words, all the skill sets I just showed you, this might be a timeline on how you would develop it. And the X factor has skills development and financial development. And parents always love to understand how we get financial development, because our sport has this ferocious appetite to chew up dollar bills, or euros if you go to Europe. So let's say we have skills development and financial development, which in a way could be hard skills and soft skills. And so we're going to develop that pyramid. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to see what these hard skills are, right? That's the pyramid we just looked at. Now let's lay over the top of that the soft skills. So the soft skills are the off-track pieces. Starts with the matrix. You have to create a financial matrix that you can use to help support your racing program. What this means is everybody that wants to go out and get sponsorship, 100%, I would almost say, 100% of all the support you will get for your driver in a junior level will be from the 2 Fs, friends and family. Sometimes people say the 3 Fs, friends, family, and fools. It doesn't matter how you get it, but I promise you, cold calling in the junior series is virtually a waste of time. The people already within your sphere of influence will be the ones that will come alongside you, that will get emotionally engaged, that will get a kick out of watching your son or your daughter develop, and as they win, they get even more engaged and they put on a little bit more. And you might have 2 or 3 or 4 or 10 small groups that help support your racing. And then it goes up. Funding, branding, marketing, sponsorship. Now let me just combine these, and you see how one lays over the other. Now, when you look at this, the matrix down here first, the one at the bottom, that starts this financial engine and brand building engine that puts it into operation. Let me give you an example of something I was obviously fairly close to. This is Connor in multiple different years in racing. The college network right there is a friend of mine. I happened to meet him in 1987. He helped me in IndyCar. He said, well, of course, I'll help you. I might get a kick out of that. Indec, Jerry Forsyth, great supporter of IndyCar for years. I happened to meet him in the paddock one time. I said, I have a driver that I think looks like he shows a lot of talent. Maybe you might be interested in a driver development program. He eventually agreed to do it. Merchant services right there. I met a man in Daytona who had a credit card processing business. I said, would you be interested in helping my son Connor? He said, okay, we'll do it. All people, relationships I met on the paddock. Your relationships will be your sponsorships at the early critical time when you need that support. Cytomax, Greg Pickett, Trans Am racer. Met him in the paddock. I used to do the television broadcasts. That's how I knew him. I said, hey, Connor's coming up to the Skip Barber ranks. Would you be interested in helping him? Okay, I'll do it. And then he won a race, and he won more races, and they got more involved. Over here, there's Merchant Services in GP3, still on. Delavico, Andy DiFrancesco. You know his son, Devlin, making his way up. But Andy has a heart for helping young drivers also. And he, when Connor was in karting, Andy says that, I'd like to help him a little bit too. Still helps him today. V-Brick, another sponsor. But my point here is every one of our supporters at that stage were all people within our personal sphere of influence. And it'll be the same for all young drivers today at this early stage. Okay, back to the combo here. When you identify the talent the driver has, you're already beginning to think, how are we going to gather up our neighbors, our friends, our dad's friends, our neighbors' friends, people we work with, people who know us, anything. You just begin to make a list and another job starts, beginning to pepper the information. You make a distribution list. So you send out an email blast, everything the driver does. He wins, he has a podium, whatever it is. So you begin to get this emotional swell, because there's no commercial or intellectual decision making made here. There's no amount of coverage that's going to pay back any investment. This is all emotional. Let's not kid ourselves here. So the emotional train has to start by you making a distribution list and communicating with the people who may help you to pay for your racing. So let's say we're now learning the technical side, year 2. Now we're teaching the technical discipline. When you teach the technical discipline, the hope is that your cart is now as fast, or maybe even a little bit faster than anybody else there, which gives you an advantage. Now you might start to win. When you start to win, I promise you the normal cycle is, now the funding starts to come a little bit more. Now it's not easy, and the funding might be 10% of what you need, or 15%. It'll never be a big check to cover everything. But what I want to give you a feel for is the sort of timeline where these things happen. So now we're in year 2, for example, rough and dirty. We understand the technical. We've got good cars under our driver all the time. We're beginning to get a bit of funding. With the good car here, now our communication starts to increase also, and we begin to communicate to the media because we start to build our brand. We're now winning races. There's now people saying, what about your man over there who won? The media are beginning to write little stories. The websites are beginning to pick up on this name who's beginning to win. So your brand begins to grow, which is why I implore all racing drivers to pick a color for their helmet. This is my pet peeve. Pick a color scheme for their helmet and keep it. It's your brand. It's your signature. You can look down the F1 grid and still pick out, no matter where they are on the grid, drivers who never change their helmets, because it's the brand that they so desperately want to build. Anyway, that was my pet peeve. Okay, so now let's say we're in 2 or 3 years, right? We're now winning races. We're now beginning to build a brand. Now we're coming under pressure, because now we're moving up in the categories. Now the cars are getting faster. Now the budgets are getting bigger. Now there's more pressure on us. So now you better make sure when the pressure comes on you, you have the mental skills added to this complete package that allows you to be bomb-proof and therefore relentless every time you're on the racetrack. Now when you get to about here, and if you have all these developed, now a pure marketing plan begins to get put in place. You're now going after commercial sponsorship. You're now real. Your brand is beginning to get built. You're now successful. You're technically able to communicate with the teams. So you have the advantage of going to the racetrack and the starting line with racing cars that are as good or maybe even better than everybody else. So the success is hoped for that it continues. If you don't have built-in roadblocks, now you're driving big, fast racing cars, you better make sure you're in physical shape. If the Indy Lights car is still brutal, or some other car at the same horsepower and same weight, if it's brutal and you're on a street circuit, you better be physically in shape. And at that stage, if you're 5 years in, now you got people saying, there's a star of the future. There's the future of our sport. There's the future we can anchor our sports success to. There's our human drama story of success over there. Isn't it interesting? 95% of all the drivers I know put this physical piece right over here. They spend 5 days in the gym. And they might only be in Formula Ford. They might only be in Pro Mazda. When the races are only 30 minutes or 40 minutes. I'm not saying it's wrong, but I'm just saying this could be a pretty good model or a roadmap for people to use. And think about this. If you developed all the skill sets that we just looked at in the Champions Pyramid, and most of those are learned traits. Most of those are not all skills we're born with. There are weaknesses in every driver captured in that pyramid. But think about if you identify, now you know them, now you can add component coaches wherever you need them, if it's on track or off track. If you have those skills and you understand this timeline, in my opinion, it takes hope away from being part of your strategy. Has anybody gone to a racetrack or even signed with a new team and said, I hope they're good. I hope my engineer has good setups. I hope I qualify well. I hope I get traffic-free laps when my tires are at their very best. I hope I get a good start after that. I hope my car is reliable, and I hope I don't make any mistakes. And I hope if I'm leading, the checkered flag comes out as soon as possible. But do you see that you remove hope from being part of your strategy if you learn and develop all the skill sets? Because if you do that, it allows you to plan and execute. Roger Penske will tell you he does not go to the Indy 500 in the month of May with a plan to win the Indy 500. He goes literally to execute the plan they put in place the March before that. Because they identify their cars, they put them off to one side, they build special speedway cars, and part of the plan is to go and execute, set it up well, don't have any accidents, don't make any mistakes, get your good engines, get it tuned, and they simply execute their plan. And success for Roger Penske is a byproduct of executing the plan that he puts in place early March. And the more you can remove hope from being part of your strategy, the higher the odds are for you to get yourself in a position to be on the victory podium. So let's add a few more pieces to this. Because now that you have a bit of a feel for how the complete champion might be built, let's just open this little can of worms here. Because I mentioned earlier on, you can't hide anything in our sport. If you're not physically fit enough to drive the car, your tongue absolutely will be hanging around the drive shaft with 10 laps to go in a long race. And when you get physically tired, what happens? You get mentally tired and you make mistakes. If you are not technically able to sort a car out, you will go to the grid against a car that is faster than yours. I don't care how much talent you have. You won't catch a faster car. So then it comes back to work ethic. Now, do you think it's a coincidence that it's easy enough for me to find quotes about drivers that show their work ethic? Sebastian Vettel. This was 2011, by the way. Sometimes it's said that Vettel was lucky because he had the best car when he was at Red Bull. But he's recognized by his rivals as one of the hardest working drivers in the paddock. That was 2011. Ed Straw from Autosport magazine. Do you think that is relevant today? Do you think he's probably still one of the hardest working drivers in the paddock? Probably. Do you think there's any correlation to the work ethic he had and the success he had? Let me show you another one. Jimmy Johnson. Chad Knaus is a friend of mine. I speak to him on a regular basis. He made a statement. He said, Jimmy Johnson is charting new territory in NASCAR. It's due to his combination of natural talent and his unsurpassed work ethic. Now, do you think it's a coincidence that he just happened to win all those championships? Let me show you one more. Michael Schumacher's work ethic often frustrated other drivers because they were always compared to him. So the rest of the paddock were frustrated that he was so invested in his success that he would pester his team to try and understand, how can we go just a little bit faster? So for all of you drivers here, young, younger, hands up those who have raced cars. Let me ask you a question. How's your work ethic? It's a question you can only answer. It's a question that will often separate the winners from everybody else. But this is something that drives people internally. And when you have it, it's evident to everybody around you. And when it's evident, what do? Just like the desire and commitment I showed you earlier on, they will work day and night to give you what you need and what you want. So we talk about work ethic. I'm always fascinated by quotes people make about drivers. And for those of you who are ever familiar with horse racing, you know they have a book on horses. You know, if you go to gamble on a horse, or for you adults, there's a book on a horse. He's good in soft conditions, he's good in hard conditions, he's good in long runs, short runs, but they have this book of statistics. I believe there's a book about every driver also. So what's the book on Jack? What's the book on Derek Daly? What's the book on Connor Daly? What's the book on Scott Anderson or Garrett Grist? There is a book on every driver. Let me show you what it looks like for some of them. Vettel. Imagine that. We've used his quote 3 times now. Why? Because he's the success story and part of the model that is completely open and evident to us and available to us to see how this champion behaves. But I said, Seb is very determined, very inquisitive, tries to understand everything, both about the car and his own performance. He's analyzing carefully everything he has done and trying to improve. That was Adrian Newey, arguably the most talented Formula One designer and engineer in our business. Analyzing carefully everything, inquisitive, trying to understand. Let me show you one more. Hamilton, incredible focus. Whatever he's doing outside, and he's pretty colorful outside the car, as we saw earlier, whatever he's doing outside, he can turn it up, get in the car and do his job. But he drives for a team that is torn between what he does on the track and what he does off it, an unnamed Mercedes boss. That was a very recent quote. So you see, they know exactly what he's doing on track and off track. This is the part of the book on Lewis Hamilton right now. One more. Kyle Busch. He's an obsessive racer. When other drivers have hobbies like golf or they work out, they do triathlons, Kyle Busch races. He's obsessed. In his career, 73 times he won in the Xfinity Series, 44 NASCAR truck races, in addition to the championship. So you see the book on him? All those who put their hands up earlier, let me ask you another question. What's the book on you? Or what is the book going to be on you, depending on how young you are? Guess who has control of what the book is on all of you drivers? You. You have complete control of the legacy and the success you may or may not have in the sport. That is the beauty about it is you no longer have to hope that somebody else gives you what you need. You have complete control. If you understand the parameters you're working within, if you understand the skill sets within the pyramid, if you understand the fold out of the model, once you understand that, you begin to take control of what you do. And so if you do all that, or to do all that, you have a choice, right? I always believe one of the most powerful words in the English language is the word choice. Because the greatest power we all possess is the power to choose. Choose whether we want to make the commitment. Choose whether we want to stand out. Choose whether we understand all the skills. We're going to write it down. We're going to go home. We're going to write it on our mirror. We're going to write it down. We're going to put it in our bed, put it under our pillow, put it in our car, put it somewhere. That you're going to drive yourself to where you want to be. And the beauty of our sport, the model's available for everybody to see. There's no secrets about what Hamilton does, or Jimmy Johnson, or Jeff Gordon, Or Vettel, there are no secrets because the journalists follow them around the world and document every minute of their day. And so if you make the choice, which I hope you do, you have the ability now to understand all the skill sets you need to develop. You have the ability to have somebody come alongside you and recognize your strengths and your weaknesses, shore up your weaknesses as quickly as possible. And you team managers, although the problem with junior teams is drivers aren't there long enough to spend long time developing the drivers. But if you can identify what a driver needs and begin to give him support in that area, it's amazing how the byproduct of putting all these skill sets together, how success comes with it. So the first question that I asked you, what if it's you? So in 5 years' time, now with the information I've provided you, I think you're much more armed to actually go out and develop those skills and the needs. So as in 5 years' time, if a big-time team manager does make a phone call, I would hope that on behalf of Honda and SCCA Pro that we can provide you with the information that is so invaluable to developing these drivers, because Honda, HPD, and SCCA Pro also don't want to have hope as part of their strategy. They want to provide a platform for drivers to come in and be successful and grow and learn and develop and become the human drama stories that American open wheel racing needs so badly at this particular time. We're right on time, so I'm going to ask you one more question. Anybody here, when they drive home, drive from work, drive the same route pretty much every evening they drive home? Yeah, pretty much. When you get home, do you park your car sort of in the same spot in the driveway? Yeah. Do you sleep in the same bed every night? Probably. Your wife or your partner, they probably get up and use the same mirror every morning, put makeup on. We're all creatures of habit. And so if we know that we're all creatures of habit, consider this for a second. As you go forward and you try and put yourself in a position to be successful, you actually will not decide your future. You will actually decide your habits. And your habits will in turn decide your future. So as you leave here today, hopefully there's a couple of nuggets you can grasp onto. One might be, what are my habits? One might be, I better make sure my desire and commitment is what it needs to be. One might be, I know I don't communicate at a high enough level, but I'm going to make an effort to make sure I do that. One might be, the technical side I know I've been told isn't great. I'm going to write everything down. I'm going to ask all the questions. I'm going to be curious and inquisitive like Vettel was. And you actually have the choice to do that. So we are right on time here. I'm glad everybody came. We would love to know where everybody heard about this seminar. So my assistant Terry is at the back here. If you haven't filled out the form that's been going around, please, because it helps us to actually reach more drivers if we know how you actually heard about this. You could actually put it on the comment form or on the form that Terry has. Now, on behalf of SCCA Pro Racing and HPD and Honda, I do have copies of my book for every driver here. Limited to one per family, because then we know that all the scribbles that the driver puts on it, that mom and dad and grandma can go back and read it and understand. But we'd be happy to give you a copy of this as a memento of our time here this morning. Everything we talked about is in here. The matrix, you have it on that little color sheet that we provided also. I would be more than happy to answer any questions that you might have. I'll answer them individually, or I'll go down to the Honda booth. You know where that is? I'll be more than happy to talk to anybody down there about any aspects of what you heard this morning. If you give us our email address, I'll give us your email address, we will happily put you on our distribution list. Then you'll have access to us if you have any questions that you want to follow up on. But our desire is to try and help the young future stars of the future. I happily say, as I did at the start, I made all the mistakes you could possibly make. And it was a great education that, on behalf of SCCA Pro Racing and Honda and myself, we're now allowed to share with people like yourselves. And please feel free to ask me any question later on. Thank you all so much. You want to say anything else? Okay, thank you. Thank you. Thank you.